Okay, so hello and welcome to UChicago Networking Night, Alumni in Fashion, brought to you by UChicago Alumni Career Programs at UChicago Alumni. My name is Joshua Levitt. I'm a 2010 alumnus of the college and staff member at UChicago Alumni. It is my pleasure and responsibility to help provide opportunities for lifelong learning, professional development, and community connection among my fellow Maroons. Our Networking Night series brings alumni together within and across industries as we learn more about each other's career journeys. Now, fashion may not be the first industry we or anyone else might associate with the University of Chicago, so we are talking about the distinctly uncommon among the distinctly uncommon. This evening, you'll hear from 4 alumni from various academic programs within the university who have all been tailoring their career journeys on the interdisciplinary runway of fashion and retail. So forgive the mixed metaphors there. Following our panel conversation, we'll network with one another. That is, knit together our wardrobe of maroon connections or something like that. We'll record this portion of our session and then turn off the recording for our networking chats. Please feel free to be on camera or off camera as you prefer. Let's welcome our panelists and begin. Vijay Talwar received his MBA from UChicago and currently serves on the Kilts Steering Committee at the Booth School of Business to support senior executives and aspiring leaders. Vijay's experience ranges from executive leadership at Foot Locker and Nike, as well as Wish.com. I know at least 2 fashion questions are top of mind for him. What is our relationship with sneakers, and how can we keep down shipping costs? David Tanenbaum is here too. He also received his MBA from UChicago, specializing in finance marketing and making his career as a market research professional and small business owner in the realm of retail. Fashion meets sustainability in some of David's work these days. Not only does he serve as co-founder, president, and CMO of the New York boutique Level Threaded Clothing, but also serves as an advisor to Refiberd, an upstart venture in textile recycling. Pauline Eviard holds a graduate degree from UChicago through the MA program in humanities or math. Since living in Tunisia as a Fulbright Fellow in art history, Pauline has fostered enduring relationships with the multifaceted people and products of Tunisia. She founded retail company Sucra, in part to offer access to goods from Tunisian entrepreneurs and creators, including apparel and home accessories, as well as specialty foods and skincare. I know Pauline is also dedicated to providing a platform for Tunisian designers to share their work with the world. We're also delighted to speak with recent alumna and entrepreneur Dinah Clady. Dinah received her degree in sociology from the college, and between online classes launched Tikor Couture with a vision of providing timeless clothing that showcases the vastness of Black culture by providing handmade, one-of-a-kind, and ethically made clothing and accessories. As the Chicago Tribune put it in their profile on her, Dinah, quote, turned her quarantine pastime of crocheting into a fashion line with social uplift for the Black community. So please put your go-to fashion accessory emoji in the chat to thank our panelists tonight for joining us during peak retail season. As we start discussing their career paths and insights, please feel free to drop your best questions into the chat. We'll try to cover as many as possible. So welcome tonight. Thank you again for joining us. Let's kind of begin at the beginning. How would you say the University of Chicago figured in your career journey, personally or professionally? Vijay, let's start with you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today. I'm honored to be here. I will answer the question in 2 parts. One is personally, and the second is professionally. Personally, I actually ended up in Chicago because my wife, who's actually the one who was in the retail and fashion business, had just moved from Columbus, Ohio to Chicago. And I decided that the only way I could kind of pull that off in the short term was apply to Kellogg and University of Chicago. And obviously, I chose the better school to do my MBA. So that was from a professional standpoint. And actually, a lot of times I feel like having a marketing and strategy background, I've kind of backdoored my way in. As my first boss who gave me a break in apparel at Nike said, I must have been really good at the pillow talk because she thought I was somebody who spent a long time in fashion. That was my first job. The second thing from a professional standpoint, it also relates back to Nike, but one of the cases that we did in a marketing class was actually all about Nike, and it was Nike in the 1980s, and about how terrible they were as a brand and how they had, been known for hiring and using child labor and, having a really sort of bad sort of unsustainable and, environment and for employees and things like that. Luckily, so when I got my offer, which was still in in 2002, which was still a few years after that, I would say a lot of people had very strong opinions on Nike and why would you go and work for a company like that? Luckily, what I did learn was that they were taking this very seriously and they had started addressing it all throughout the 90s. So by the time I got there, it was a little bit less of an issue. I wouldn't say I would think it's still an issue for some people, but I think they've come a long way from their original roots and the stigma associated with it. I'll stop there.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much. David, tell us, how would you say the University of Chicago played in your career journey, personally or professionally?
Look, I would know what I want to say in the University of Chicago event here, but the truth is, University of Chicago specifically did not really play much of a role in my entering into the fashion, or in my case, the business of fashion. I had trained as a lawyer prior to coming to the University of Chicago. I'd studied law in New York, and then was working as a mergers and acquisitions attorney for a couple of years before deciding I wanted to pursue finance and investment banking. And that is originally why I chose to come to the University of Chicago. And fate would have a different outcome for me. I grew up in the apparel sourcing field, in the sense that my father had been an agent on behalf of various factories around the world. He'd worked specifically in Eastern Europe and Romania and China and Japan, Taiwan, Korea, and all those countries. And I had, as a tyke, traveled the world with him and gone to the factories and sort of sat in on sessions where he was in negotiations with factories and things of that nature. So, having traveled the world and seen a lot, and then practiced law and sitting at my desk all the time, I was bored. And eventually I thought that getting an MBA, going to finance, would cure that, but it really didn't. And I wound up, after Chicago, I wound up at, back in law first, and then Citi and Bloomberg. But eventually I left and basically joined my father initially in the sourcing business. And then separately, my father had focused on more clothing, like suited separates and dress blouses and dress apparel, and I had no interest in that. And so I focused on what I liked, which was mostly the denim segment. And so I've spent the last 10 years doing sourcing for denim, and I've worked with a lot of terrific clients in the retail world and also branded importers. And then subsequent to that, somebody at my biggest connection to the University of Chicago in this industry is somebody who I'd gone to school with, but went into the venture capital industry and eventually introduced me to the folks at Refiberd, because they needed somebody who was familiar with fabrics and the apparel space in directing how they wanted to develop their products, and how they wanted to talk to people in the industry. And those people at Refiberd are developing recycled textiles, and they're turning old jeans into new cotton, which is a nice trick and something that's desperately needed. So that is the closest connection I have to Chicago. But I can talk about the industry, more the business than the fashion. I'm not really your fashion guy, as you might be able to tell, or as my wife would certainly attest to. So I'm not that person.
It's interdisciplinary, David. It's interdisciplinary. All right, Pauline, how did it figure, or you can pull a David Tanenbaum and say it did not figure in your own career journey, and it's just a coincidence. Tell us.
Well, first off, I wanted to say thank you for spending your evening here, a few days, during the holiday season. And thank you, Joshua, for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm super excited to be alongside Vijay, David, and Dinah, talking about all different perspectives of the fashion industry. So the University of Chicago did play a big part, actually. I did my Master's of Arts program in Humanities, so that it's called a math program. And what brought me there was actually, following undergraduate, my undergraduate degree in art history, not at the University of Chicago. I spent a year studying ancient Roman mosaics, in a year studying on a Fulbright scholarship in Tunisia. And while studying there, I didn't have an advisor. It's very much open, free, research on, no sort of structure. It was really driven by me. And I realized that I wanted to go back to grad school to use that research for a master's degree. And the University of Chicago was perfect for that. This 1-year master's in humanities was perfect because I was coming in with the research that I wanted to do. The trimesters was really efficient, and the trimester system was really efficient. And so that's what drew me to the University of Chicago for my master's. And it was also at the time, studying art history, I was contemplating pursuing a PhD, and that master's program, 1-year master's program, actually helped me decide that PhD was not what I wanted to pursue, and I wanted to go into the workforce in a different way. And so definitely University of Chicago played a big part. Professionally, I was able to wrap up. It was incredible. We all know critical thinking is so important at the University of Chicago, and helped me, subsequently I worked 7 years at a nonprofit, cultural nonprofit, working in cultural heritage, preservation of cultural heritage. And then following that is when I launched Sucra in 2017, again, showcasing Tunisian designers through their goods. And so I do believe that critical thinking piece helps me with the storytelling that comes with Sucra. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds like even as you move from one stage of your academic journey and professional journey, is actually some of the same sort of skills and values that you were bringing from one to the next. Thank you. Dinah, tell us.
Yeah, so first I want to apologize for having my camera off. I had the unfortunate pleasure of my power turning off. So I'm currently sitting in the dark on my phone.
Oh my goodness.
To be here.
Tell me you live in the 2020s without telling me you live in the 2020s.
Honestly.
For living it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dinah. I am actually a very recent graduate of the university, graduated in 2022, so I'm not even a year out. And I started Tico Couture in the midst of the pandemic. So going to the University of Chicago during the pandemic, online schooling, I had a lot more free time than I think the average UChicagoan would have. And so I've been crocheting since I was 12 years old. Everybody told me growing up, oh, you should sell your stuff. And I never took them seriously. And even when I started my Instagram account over the pandemic, I still wasn't necessarily taking myself seriously. But I just began garnering a big following. And so I began to take it seriously. And I would say that the connection that UChicago had with me and my business specifically is kind of back to what you were saying, Pauline, about the storytelling elements of fashion. And as a sociology major, where I got to, for the first time, dig into text, where I got to learn more about my history as a Black person, it was really riveting. And in the pandemic, with the Black Lives Matter movement really being at its height, I had no other way to kind of voice my emotions and the thoughts and feelings I had going on in my head. And fashion became one way that I could truly do that. And UChicago further kind of connects because unlike you, David, my mind is heavily lacking on the business of fashion. And so getting involved in the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship, making connections there with grad students, at Booth and as well as the staff there has really helped me kind of to develop those skills. And so it's been very exciting to see my business grow. It's still very new, but I'm so honored to be on this panelist and to hear from the other panelists. And honestly, I'm excited to hear from you attendees as well, why you're interested in fashion, what brought you here, and, hopefully continuing to form connections that way as well.
Here, definitely co-sign all of that. Thank you so much, Dinah. And then that's a natural segue really to the next question, at least that I had in mind, which was to please tell us, even more about your work now, and from your particular vantage point, what do you view as the most compelling or perhaps confounding aspects of fashion and retail in this moment? So Donna, let's follow up with you.
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting question. Compelling, I love that it really gives me an opportunity to tell a story. I felt that it wasn't until I started this business that I kind of really saw what the power of being able to choose how you show up really represents. For me, I can't control the color of my skin, but it was really nice to find agency in what I was able to wear. And so that's what compels me about fashion. I think when it comes to the fashion industry, specifically the luxury and high-end fashion industry, which is more so where I operate in, it's very white, it's very Eurocentric. And I think it's hard to kind of break barriers that way as a person of color. And so that's, it's a barrier that I'm excited to work through. And I think the best thing for me has been, the collaborations that I've had and the people that I've been able to meet who are just as creative, who are just as passionate and not willing to let those barriers stay in that way.
Awesome. I dropped a link in the chat to Dinah's line, so you can check out her portfolio there and her threads. Thank you so much for sharing. I think what you were saying and what Pauline was saying before really mesh very well. The way that fashion is both business and expression. So yeah, I appreciate that. How about, how about Pauline? How about you? I'm also going to drop a link to Supra so you can check out her in real time.
Dinah made a good point that I think the fashion industry is a global industry, but the expression of it is very Eurocentric. And what I've been really intrigued about working with Tunisia is that once you get past that, there are fashion shows that happen all around the world that really feature regional talent. And that's what is really what I'm drawn to more and more. And I think it's more rewarding, and also incredibly, you find unique items that are not, that are not mainstream. And so, for example, one of my designers, Anissa Aida, really a Tunisian emerging star, based in her 20s, went to Parsons School of Design. And she has shown at fashion shows now around the world. She was just in Barbados for a fashion show, as well as Tunisia, Berlin, and then some in China. And so I think once you get past that initial behemoth of really Eurocentric brands, whether they're contemporary, luxury, fast fashion, there's a whole world of really intriguing designs and creators. Actually, David, I'm interested to hear if you ever worked with Tunisian factories, because a lot of European brands source from Tunisia with factories there. They have a very rich, textile industry, and a lot of European jeans are made in Tunisia. So I'm kind of, if you don't mind, Josh, cross-panel question.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what this is for.
So I can answer that now, as I have not worked with Tunisian manufacturers. I would say that I'll take you back to the original question, which was things that confound you about the industry. I'll keep in mind that what I do is on the sort of diametric opposite side of the scale here. I am working mostly in mass market as opposed to high-end fashion. And for me, the thing that's confounding about the industry is that the things that everyone wants, nobody can afford, right? That's the basic premise of what I do, right? Is that everybody wants to have, everybody wants to have a tailored look, right? Something that is, sort of unique to them. And if the closer you are to having your own style, your own look, if you want to start manufacturing that, obviously the more expensive it is, right? Because everything scales in this industry. So it's, one of the key components to being able to afford to produce the things that you're making is that you have to have enough people who kind of agree that this is good. So that's one issue. And then it continues like that, right? The things that people agree on, they'd like to have sustainability, right? They want to have sustainable practices involved. Well, okay, that's great. And a lot of the retailers will impose that on the various places where I work in the world. And that's fair and that's fine. But somebody has to be willing to pay for that, right? And the big problem is that, the more you want to impose requirements on, places that manufacture, they're willing to make whatever changes are necessary, so long as you're willing to pay for it. And what happens is, the issue is that sustainability comes at a price, and not everybody wants to pay it. So it's issues like this, right, that are confounding, right? That people want certain things and they just can't afford it. And the question of what is the value of what you're creating, and how can you achieve sales, getting the type of value that you believe that you should have, that's a difficult question. And it's I think easier when you work with people who have big brands and who sort of have a sense of what they're worth, but their worth is baked into the scale of what they're providing, right? If I have X thousands of units or hundreds of thousands of units, if I'm Walmart or Costco and I want to place orders in places, I know what the value of that is, because I can put a lot of people to work and you can generate even a small amount of profit on a large order, right? It becomes a lot more difficult when you start to use a smaller scale. And so that's one of the real challenges for sourcing if you're working with people who don't have those, those mass market type of orders. I don't know if I answered your question, but I thought I'd answer the question of what confounds me, and those are things that confound me. I had not worked in Tunisia, although I will say that there is I think there's a global effort to diversify away from the traditional manufacturers, right? Away from China, away from, at this point, Bangladesh has become one of the very large manufacturers in the world. Away from India, away from Mexico, people are looking for alternative sourcing. Places in Africa have kind of grabbed the mantle, and that's, I think, a good thing. But there's some significant, issues that exist, both in terms of costing, transportation, understanding the U.S. or North American ethos regarding delivery times and things of that nature. It's all new and it's all a challenge. Some of it has been made easier because of treaties that exist, right, that provide for duty-free, duty-free export or import into this country. But price alone won't overcome some of the challenges that exist with regard to some of the newer sourcing locations. And if you're accustomed to providing apparel for Europe, for instance, it can be difficult to change your mindset to understand the ways in which the U.S. market is different from that, and what our requirements are, and what our prices are, what our volume requirements are, what our delivery dates might be. So I think Tunisia has a place going forward, and I assume that it will be one of many African nations that will, eventually be at the forefront of substitute. People will substitute Chinese manufacturing or Bangladesh manufacturing, Indian manufacturing, and try to bring on, particularly places like Kenya is popular now, and Egypt has been popular for a long time. But there are places throughout Africa that I think, Ghana and others will start to build. We'll say.
You heard it here, friends.
You want me to go ahead, Josh?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I know you've also been thinking about the international global logistics and so on.
Absolutely. So I'll kind of take this question in two parts. The first question was really, what am I up to now? And I'm actually in the midst of a transition. So I just left my job as a CEO of Wish.com about 60 days ago. I'm spending a lot of time, actually, for the first time in my life. I've decided I'm going to take about 4 to 6 months off, because I said 6 months, but I'm not even sure I can get to that 6 months without driving my wife crazy, at least. So kind of keeping it a little bit more open-ended right now, but I'm only 2 months into it. And for what it's worth, I don't know if any of you are thinking about transitioning into fashion or are in transitions yourself. I believe that unfortunately, Q1 next year is going to be pretty brutal. What you've seen so far with, Meta and some of the other companies with layoffs and things like that, I think is only scratching the surface. In retail and fashion, typically nobody wants to do anything until after Christmas. So I believe that Q1 will actually have a pretty big, and the reason I mentioned that is there's a couple of resources I wanted to kind of highlight. One is a book that I've read that I absolutely love, which is called Life is in the Transitions. So if you get a chance, and if you're going through a transition, it's a great time to read it. But it's actually just talks about the fact that we're all going to experience a lot more transitions in our lives. And so we might as well get used to it and might as well sort of read up on it, kind of thing. So that's kind of what I'm up to right now. Part of what I did do after reading and taking some time off is really starting to think about, where do I spend my free time? Right. And this is, for me at least, has always been really important. My free time has always gone towards three things. One is shopping. Even though I'm a guy, I shop and spend more time, online or offline than my wife or some of my friends growing up. So I always thought that's one of the reasons I wanted to be in retail. I love traveling, right? So something in the world of travel and, overlap between travel and shopping is something that's attracted me. The other one is sports. I spend a lot of my free time watching sports, going to live events. I've been to up until Qatar, I've been to every World Cup and Euro Champ game, since 2006 in Germany. So I've been to kind of a lot of those tournaments. I've enjoyed them sort of live. But so it kind of all, and that's part of my story in terms of even why I wanted to get into fashion, was this whole thing. When my wife was working in fashion, I was always in awe of her, what she did for a living, and that is the most confounding part to me, is that there's this whole aspect, and I think you talked about it a little bit, David. I grew up in Bangalore, which is a pretty big source globally, has a lot of global factories. A lot of friends whose parents or otherwise might own some of those factories. So I was in and out of some of those factories even as a child. What's amazing to me is that there's this really interesting thing between product quality and price and value. And it's this weird dynamic, because everybody then talks about the fact that we want to have a more sustainable model and a more environmentally friendly model. But I can tell you, I have 6 nieces and a daughter, all between the ages of 18 is the youngest one now, and 24, I think, is the oldest one. And all of them, each and every one of them, buys a ton on Shein.com. And Shein, by the way, stole a huge bunch of market share from Wish.com because we were originally the first to market. And again, it was all about going straight from factories in China to consumers, right? So you can buy a t-shirt for $2. You actually pay $5 for shipping and $2 for the t-shirt, right? So your shipping cost is sometimes 2x the cost of the actual product as well. Now, what's interesting is when you talk to them, because what you also read about Gen Z is how much they care about the environment. And when I talk to my own nieces and my daughter, what I hear back all the time is, yes, you're right, I probably shouldn't be shopping there, but I can't stop myself. Like the deal is too good. And that's the thing about retail. That's the thing about shopping. That's the thing about what you want to buy, right? You're all for, and again, I'm not trying to imply that people, there aren't people out there who are more principled and are willing to pay a higher price to make sure that everything that they are buying is made in a more of a sustainable manner. And but it's an interesting sort of choice. And I think that's the thing about, like, Shein has become one of the biggest companies out there. And really, yes, they do a lot of fast fashion, but they sell it really, really cheap, right? I mean, Shein today, the reputation they have is actually not that different than the reputation Nike had in the late 80s and the early 90s, right? Why? Because they were manufacturing sneakers in Europe. In China. Actually, it was originally Taiwan, then Korea, and then China kind of thing. But my point is, the other part about the fashion piece that I've actually absolutely loved is that even when I was at Nike, made a choice after we had a group called the Global Strategy Group. We came in to do strategy, and then you spent 2 years there, and then you went out into the broader world of Nike. Every one of my colleagues in the strategy group decided to go into footwear because that's what Nike is known for. I was the only one who went into apparel. And interesting enough, while Nike was already probably the world's largest apparel company even at that time, the truth is my career took off because I didn't go into the core business, which was much, much more competitive. And, we were sort of a distant second, if you will, in the apparel things. But there was a huge amount of growth opportunity. Like if you look at the relative market share in apparel, Nike has a much lower market share in apparel than sneakers. So I really enjoyed that sort of time I spent in the apparel division there, reporting directly to the global head of apparel. I learned a lot during that time. The other part, the last thing I'll just comment on that sort of confounds me so much is the role that sneakers has played in fashion, right? I don't know if you guys remember a time, but 10 years ago, I mean, I'm not talking a long time ago, maybe 10, maybe 15 years ago max, luxury brands was dependent on mostly women above 50 who had a lot of money, right? Then you had a whole change that happened with, the people that got hired, right? So like Virgil Abloh by Louis Vuitton, and, there's just a whole bunch of people who went into luxury brands who came from the culture of streetwear and sneakers. And that sneaker, to me, is the reason why younger people shop luxury today, right? So it turned into something, handbags have always been around, but, sneakers, yeah, somebody saying sneakers and hats, but I mean, those are kind of the accessories became the way to tell your own fashion story, right? Your own sort of, way to kind of talk about how you like to dress and how you like to kind of wear. So anyway, so for me, that was actually another interesting sort of turnaround in terms of when you think about fashion. I think sneakers play a much, much bigger role in it today than they did 15 or 20 years ago.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, I want to pick up on at least one of those threads about really like what advice you would give to someone who is thinking about pivoting into fashion, pulling extra credit if you also make a book recommendation. Just kidding. That's what networking nights are for. You should come away with some recommended reading. We respond well to homework in this crowd.
I think a couple of things. I think there are a lot of good, I'm sure there are lots of book recommendations, but there's tons of newsletters out there that are based on fashion, the full gamut from luxury to contemporary to mass market, fast fashion. So I have to think about a couple of those and maybe I'll send them later. But I think identify sort of what intrigues you about fashion. I think across this panel, you have so many different points.
She freezes for everybody. I think we may have lost her. Oh, there you go, Pauline, you're back.
Pauline.
And you're mute.
Don't know what just happened.
Ever since there are so many points.
There are so many points. So whether it's sourcing or logistics, shipping logistics to marketing, branding, PR. I mean, there's TikTok. I mean, TikTok is huge with the fashion. I mean, I think that's totally become a new platform for fashion commentators outside of kind of challenging a lot of the mainstream media, traditional print media, print and online media. So there's a ton of different. So I think identifying kind of what intrigues you about fashion and the fashion just generally can is creative, right? But then there's the business side of it, the logistics side. So yeah, I think seeing where your strengths are and if you want to be in that industry, finding your spot within that.
Awesome, thank you. Dinah, you've most recently pivoted in. What advice do you have for your fellow alumni considering the field?
Yes, so I think I have two big pieces that immediately come to mind. The first is don't be afraid to start. Like, even if you don't have a lot of resources, it's surprising, at least in my personal experience, how much I was able to learn along the way. When I started, it was in the middle of the pandemic. The only thing I had was a crochet hook and some yarn that I took from my mother. And, like Pauline suggesting, I used the social medias and just with persistence and a lot of just pure belief, I was able to grow my brand, even starting out with limited resources. And I'm excited to see how much more it will grow just because I took a chance on myself. So that's key advice number one. And key advice number two is find yourself either a mentor or someone in the field that wants to do what you want to do. I was very fortunate enough to find another Chicago-based crochet designer who actually works for Nike now. And she served as a large mentor for me, really put me on to things that I didn't know I had to be knowledgeable about. And so having someone you can talk to that's a little further ahead in the field than you are, but y'all can kind of go and bounce back to one another for that support and for that help, I think is also very essential.
Thank you. Yeah, that is compelling, great advice. Take notes, friends. David, what would you say? I know this is a hot button question for you.
So so in terms of getting into the industry, we had a sort of a pregame meeting, and I said to Josh that I would be concerned about encouraging anybody to get into the industry, right? And I don't want you to feel like I am discouraging you if this is your passion, right? If you say to me, I'm going into this industry because this is what I have to do in life. This is what I want to do. And this is the thing that I need to be able to express myself or to be able to, scratch the itch that my, creative side needs. That's fine. I think that the only way that you're going to succeed is if you have that sort of driving passion that you want to do, whatever it is that you want to do. What I don't want to do is come off as somebody who is recruiting people into the industry, because it's a tough time to get into this business right now. I mean, if I think Vijay had alluded to this earlier about Q1, but even going forward, I think that there's a lot of structural concerns that I have about the business, particularly at the mass market level, but even at other levels, right? It's just becoming, I think, increasingly, the world is increasingly wanting to have things that are tailored to them, right? You're getting things that are designed more and more for you. And as that happens, the ability to scale that effort goes away. And I think that's something that the industry hasn't reckoned with yet, doesn't really understand. I mean, I think a lot of people are trying, but I think that the individualization that's taking place in the fashion industry is creating real challenges. And maybe that's just from my perspective, but I think that makes it difficult to figure out what you want to do. Do you want to be a sourcing director at a retailer? How are you gonna, where are you gonna, how are you gonna get this done, right? It used to be a pretty a sort of easy thing to follow the trends in the industry to figure out where you can make things. And there were always people who were willing to make it at the price that you needed it for, and you could get it done. It wasn't quite that simple, but it existed. I think now it's getting to be more and more challenging, and it's something that you should think about, both if you're trying to produce something that is, that you want to be sold, and if you are, on the production side of the business, how are you going to be able to achieve what is going to be a new set of requirements? So there are real challenges out there, and I just want to, I don't want to be too rosy about it. But I also don't want to discourage anybody from pursuing something, because the truth is, the people who understand that there's a challenge and who take it on and figure out a way are the people who change the industry. And it may be the people who are on this call. So I don't want to, dissuade anybody who feels like they're going to change the world from trying to do that.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I want to make sure you have enough time for networking. So we'll turn to a couple of Q&As. One submitted in advance: what is your favorite scene from The Devil Wears Prada? Or if you haven't read it or seen it, what popular image about the fashion industry would you say rings true or doesn't ring true in your experience? How about, I guess let's make our way around again. How about Dinah?
You're asking what images do or do not ring true about the fashion industry?
Yes.
Interesting. So I've never watched The Devil Wears Prada, like, at all. But I would say, for me, I guess an image that inspired my brand personally was the image of the Black Panther Party. Again, it's just another view and lens of storytelling. And it just, to me, shows that people have been using fashion in a whole sort of ways. And I guess another image on that exact lines is Dapper Dan standing next to his artwork. I feel like these are images that pop in my head for me, and I definitely see it. And it's really cool to see more new and up and coming designers, especially designers of color, really just changing and reshaping the industry. So these are definitely the sorts of images that I love to see.
Yes, exactly, like against this perhaps widespread established ones, kind of these new images that are like reshaping what the popular conceptions of the fashion industry can be. Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Vijay, how about you?
For me, it was the whole movie itself, the whole premise of the movie. She was so excited to get this job in fashion, and she was really the assistant to the assistant of of the main sort of the head honcho, so to speak, right? So to me, it was just and that sort of, I think, is the reality of fashion, right? If you want to break into fashion, the only thing you really, really need, it's not the education, it's not the background, in my opinion, it's really the passion. And if you don't have that passion, and if because the reality is most people end up taking much below their actual market value to go into fashion or to start something in fashion. You don't do it for the money, you don't do it for the prestige and honor, and maybe that'll come 20 years later. So the reality is you do it because you love it and you're so passionate about it. And that's why I think it's really important. And I think that movie was exactly about that, right? If you had that passion, yes, you're initially you're sort of nobody wants to even say hi to you, and then all of a sudden you become a huge sort of part of that wheel, and it helps it. It almost doesn't work without her, right? Towards the end of the movie. So that's kind of my takeaway.
Excellent, thank you. David, tell us.
I'll chime in here. I surprisingly, I'm a huge fan of this movie. I say surprisingly because I told you I'm not really the fashion guy, but I think that there are lessons in the movie that apply, and not just to the fashion industry. I'll start by going back to the legal industry, which is where I started, right? And when I came in as a young lawyer, I was always astounded at the level of detail that the senior partners require, the exacting nature of what it is that you're doing. If you're drafting a memo, if there's a typo in it, you're going to get called on the carpet. And it's a typo, right? I put in a quotation mark that has curved quotes instead of straight quotes, and I'm getting yelled at for this. And I went to law school, right? And it's like, how is this possible? And I think that is the exact same thing that happens in the fashion industry, right? There's a scene, I think, where I forgot. It's Andy, thank you, is picking, she's lamenting the fact that a blue is a blue, right? And they go through a whole like description of how that blue was, debuted at a show and it became this and that, eventually filters down to the mass market. And what the point is, like, the blue that's chosen, right, is the blue that's chosen. And you would do well, if you're getting into the industry, you would do well to understand that the people who are creating things in the business and the people who are in charge of, whether that's the art, the design, or the sourcing, the people who want a particular color are not going to accept something that is close but not really that color, right? And so understanding the exacting nature of what it is that you're doing, understanding that everything that you're trying to build or produce or source for somebody is a product of a vision that somebody has for that product, and understanding that delivering exactly what people want, that's the goal. And there are going to be people who, particularly there are people who don't understand the exacting nature of particularly the US market. If you're overseas, it may not be apparent to those people that this shade is not this shade, right? They want to get it done. It's easier, it's cheaper, it's faster, it's what's available. And you run into problems with that if you are not focused on getting people exactly what it is that they want. So I think, while it's a bit over the top, the exacting nature of the main character, right, is something that you find in all industries and in many different walks of life. And it's a good lesson for anybody who's going into the business to understand that people like that exist everywhere, and it's no different.
Yeah, David, it's cerulean.
Thank you. Yes. Yes.
Pauline, tell us. I appreciate it. I'm just busting your chops.
The movie is entertaining. I haven't watched it in a few years, so I can't pick one specific scene that is my favorite, but it's intriguing to me. I can't remember what year it came out, but I'm intrigued how at that point, print media was the defining word of fashion, and how much that has changed in the past decade. Can someone tell me when that movie came out? Like in the mid 2000s? It was like I should have looked that up.
No, but to your point, right? It's all centers on the magazine.
Yes.
And now the primary medium has changed.
Yeah, and print distribution is much lower than it was at its peak, and who knows whether it's ever going to go back to its peak numbers, but how that you now have so many other outlets, especially thank you, 2006. Yes, I think that was, their budgets must have been out of this world for print media. And so how much that's changed. So that's, for me, what's, now you have social media, TikTok, online, so many different outlets for people to get their fashion, needs.
Right. And to showcase their work or the work of designers that, that they're, coming to know and so on.
Or consumers, readers can go a lot of different places now than just their local magazine store, which, I still love to pick up a, Architectural Digest or Vogue or W magazine, but those numbers have gone down tremendously.
Yes.
But what the second part of your question about what was the second part of the question?
Was that what, like, popular image or conception about the fashion industry rings true or doesn't ring true?
Oh. I mean, I think with everything going online, I still think consumers want a retail experience. I don't think brick and mortar is ever going to go away. It's definitely, you have, not that you have, and I don't even have a brick and mortar space, but I do believe that humans still want that. I mean, I think, David, you were talking about personalization, but like, I think stores that are successful have that personalization component to it. And so, or have that, not personalization, but sort of that customization for, you know, the person that comes in. And if you're gonna, and that can be at a, even at a larger brand, if they invest in sort of that the store experience. And there's so many different with technology, you can have very engaging store experiences. So I think despite the proliferation of online, there's still brick and mortars is still it's never going to go away. Textile
is tactile. Yes. Just make that up. I don't know if that's a thing that people say, but that's what I'm hearing. Let's open the floor for a question from our live attendees, and then we'll shift into our breakout sessions. Please feel free to unmute and ask away. My goodness. Ken, all right, I'm calling on you because I'm really interested in what you're saying in the chat about the Black Panther related museum exhibits on the South Side. So can you tell us actually a little bit about that?
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
And so don't quote me on this. I don't know if it's actually through that exhibit, but
What's being recorded, so.
And so I'm just recollecting, or was recollecting earlier as Dina was talking about how I saw this some remarkable stuff that was Black Panther related. I had no context about really Black Panther, though I've heard it a little bit, or just a little bit about it through my time in Hyde Park over the years. And then kind of just things were clicking in my head where I was just have to think, all right, this is a population of folks who have been perceived in a certain way, and they've been displayed in this exhibit in a certain way. It seemed a little bit threatening, but then also a little bit, well, actually, I say threatening, but then part of me wants to say that actually it's more like, or I thought to myself, this could be perceived as threatening, or it could just be perceived as very, I don't know, fashionable, or like very specific to the fashion of those in the Black Panther community. And I don't know, kind of trying to split apart how things are perceived by folks versus how things actually are. I think that's like really hard. And then what Dina was sharing earlier was just getting me thinking about how fashion is not something that we typically think about when we look at outfits and the way people are dressed and how they're appearing, but it is there, and it is just an inherent part of where we're coming from these days, it seems.
Right, and as a form of cultural expression, political expression, social expression, and also aesthetic expression. Right, that sounds, Donna, right, kind of what. Right.
Yeah, no, I think that's it exactly. And I think one thing that's really cool and interesting about fashion is, you know, perception does play like a huge role. Like even someone's viewing the Black Panther Party and viewing them as threatening. But then the Black Panther Party itself may be having a different attempt. I mean, what the Black Panther Party wore were leather jackets, berets, they carried guns. They did look threatening. But the whole cause and whole movement was to show them as a united front. So interesting. I actually too have recommended reading, which I'll go ahead and drop it in the chat, that kind of talks more about this.
Extra credit, Dinah.
Yeah, it's called Liberated Threads, and I highly recommend it. It's just a really great book that kind of just details a lot of the historical aspects of fashion, specifically in the Black community in America in the 60s. So great read.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. I want to make sure with our second half hour that we have our networking time. I want to thank our panelists so much for this engaging conversation. And please feel free to raise any questions that you haven't had a chance to ask in this session. Well, I'll just go over some house rules and something. We're really going to make networking less awkward here. Your goal is to turn strangers into advocates. You may want to take this time to perhaps pursue a data-driven approach to networking. Make sure that you have certain types of roles covered in who's in your circle. By that same token, you might want to use this hour to diversify your circle among alumni with different areas of expertise and professional experience. It's also a great time to practice your 30-second story, your tell me about yourselves, your favorite interview questions, and so on. And then definitely I recommend following up with each other now and later. Use that chat to share your LinkedIn, to share your portfolio, whatever it may be. Right. I'm going to shut off the recording with thanks again to everyone tuning in, and then we will start our breakout session.